7, 6, go for main engine start, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Welcome to the Orbital Perspective Podcast, where we dolly zoom out to a perspective where upcoming megatrends become visible. Every day, it is more and more apparent that we are in the midst of the Great Transition. Everything is changing rapidly. The fundamentals of business, government, and society are being rewritten almost on a daily basis. We are truly living during a time where the riskiest course of action is to stay the course. The most hazardous path is to take the tried and true. We are also living during a time where it is becoming more and more apparent that the status quo is not working. At least it's not working for everyone. And until the status quo is working for everyone, we will do nothing more than slap temporary band-aids on our problems and our challenges. We are presently dealing with crisis after crisis. But these crises can serve as a wake-up call. They can be our call to action to incorporate the changes necessary to make us all more resilient and better equipped to deal with the future crises that will undoubtedly come our way. The Orbital Perspective is all about transcending the divisive walls that separate us and embracing the awe and wonder of our shared humanity. What all the guests on the Orbital Perspective podcast have in common is they are all able to see things from a slightly different perspective. And when we look at issues from different perspectives, we see things in stereoscopic vision. Multiple perspectives allow us to see the depth of a situation below the two-dimensional us versus them surface. The other thing all our guests have in common is they are all proof that you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. Now, this is not an interview, and it's also not just a conversation between two friends. It's a conversation amongst all of us. If you're listening live, please post your questions and your comments so that we can bring you into the conversation. And if you're listening to the recorded conversation, still please join in with your comments and questions and be a part of this evolving community. Thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation from the Orbital Perspective. Hey everyone, welcome to the last Orbital Perspective podcast episode for 2020. I'm glad you're here. This has been quite a journey throughout the year. The podcast was born out of a desire to give hope, give reliable information, give guidance on folks as we dealt with the emerging coronavirus crisis, back in early 2020. And so it started out as conversations sheltered in place. Initially, we were just on Instagram, and then we evolved to have Facebook and YouTube. And then now we listen to your feedback and your comments, and it's a full-blown podcast now on all the major podcast platforms. And so thank you for being along for this journey and for all your comments. And like the intro says, this is not just a conversation between two folks. It's a conversation amongst all of us. And so you're all part of this. So jump in with your comments and questions. When we started out, again, it was all focused on the crisis known as COVID-19. But as 2020 developed and we realized what an incredibly transformational year it was becoming, and as we faced more and more crises of different type, it all became about, how do we come out the other side of these crises stronger, more unified than ever. We've had, pulmonologists, we've had epidemiologists, we've had heads of state, CEOs, musicians, all kinds of folks. We even had the former chief of staff of the U.S. Air Force on board, and all of these people are making a tremendous impact on the world, and all of them provide a unique perspective. And that's what it's all about. It's about looking at things from different perspectives. There's a lot of divisiveness in the world right now because people are locking into their own narrow perspectives. They're missing the point that it's because of our difference in perspectives and that diversity of perspective that gives us strength in our problem-solving process and how we attack challenges and everything else. And so I'm really excited. My guest today is also providing a very unique perspective. He is a visionary innovator, one who basically puts increasing unity at the forefront of everything he does in business. And so with that, I want to introduce today's guest, Tony DiMatteo. Tony DiMatteo is the co-founder and CEO of Lottery.com, which enables consumers in multiple states to play state-sanctioned lottery games directly from their mobile phones. Lottery.com is also the largest provider of lottery data in the world, with clients including Google and Amazon. The company has worked with regulators and industry leaders to help establish lottery courier services in the United States. Tony is responsible for global initiatives and the development and execution of the company's long-term strategy. He is also the executive director of Win Together Trust and wintogether.org, a charitable platform enabling causes to raise funds for global and local projects. He is a sought-after thought leader, and his approach to social impact, entrepreneurship, blockchain, and the gaming industry has been covered in the Wall Street Journal, VentureBeat, TechCrunch, Inc., and much more. Tony has also been a featured guest speaker at Tony Robbins' Platinum Finance and Peter Diamandis' A360 events, speaking on the future of fundraising. Hey, Tony.
Hey, Ron.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Good to see you again.
How's things in the forest?
Yeah, it's good. It's nice and cool and a good temperature. I can't complain.
So you're coming in live from Austin, Texas.
That's right.
Although I don't think that's Austin behind you, but my background is not real either. So
right, that's fair.
So thanks again for being on the episode, especially since it's the last episode of the season. We'll be back in 2021, but this is the last one for this year. I was thinking back to when we met. It's a few years ago. A couple of years ago, and I remember I was going to an event at Reuters in Times Square. It was a UN event on the Decade of Women, right? And
yeah.
I remember looking at the program of the speakers and everything, and I saw Tony DiMatteo, and I was like, "Wow, that's really cool. Why is my high school football coach speaking at this event?" Because my high school football coach, Tony DiMatteo, is still a football coach, by the way. Is one of the winningest coach in New York State history. He was the NFL coach of the high school coach of the year. Really an amazing coach and leader. And but then I realized somebody equally as impressive was Tony DiMatteo, not DiMatteo. And so that's how we met back in New York a few years ago. Do you remember that event?
No, I do. I actually completely remember that whole thing, and it's interesting how the universe connects us, right?
Yeah.
You have that previous connection to my name, and my last name DiMatteo. I've heard it a million ways. It's the same letters in the same order, but it changes depending on who you're talking to and where you're from. But absolutely, I remember that, and I remember sort of seeing you speak at that event and the video that you played after that, and I was just so impressed of. It felt like to me is, that somebody got it in the same way that I got it, which is that our own perspective is so limited, right? I feel like honestly, sometimes I feel like we are horses in Times Square with the blinders on, right? We have such a limited perspective, and that's how we grow up.
Yeah. And
we can only see things through our own eyes, right? And it's such a skill to develop over time that really the way to grow, even as an individual, is to see things through other people's eyes.
Exactly.
And you have to understand why do they do these things? What do they want, right? If you sit down at a table together, what's our motivations? How does this all work? And that is such a esoteric thing, but it deserves discussion. And I appreciate your podcast specifically because that's what it's about. It's about perspective, right? It's about taking yourself outside of your own experiences, your own past and seeing the world in a way that, like, that is not you yourself. It's how do you see other people's view of things.
Exactly. And the main tenet of the podcast and the book the book, The Orbital Perspective, is that you don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. And I think you're a good example of that. So, hey, during this conversation, if I slip and I call you coach, forgive me if that happens.
Absolutely. Fair enough.
A shout out to everybody who's tuning in. I see you all jumping into this conversation. Well, I don't see you jumping into the conversation. I see you jumping into the observer's booth there, but we want you in the conversation. So start sending us your comments and your questions. So, Tony, maybe a good way to start would be, I'd really love to hear the story, and I'm sure the listeners would love to hear the story of both lottery.com, what motivated you to start that, what's the goals and objectives, and also Win Together. And so sure. I don't know which you should cover first, but whatever makes the most sense. But we definitely want to hear both.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a person who I'll say has to be fair, like a different perspective on things. Is like I barely graduated high school. Honestly, I just sort of barely hit that mark. And if they had said, Tony, you have to go to summer school, I'm not sure that I would have done that. Honestly, that's how close it was. But I just sort of looked at the world differently, and that was a difficult road to be honest. If you sort of think about a kid who doesn't understand the current system and like, why are we doing all these things? And what's happening is like, I felt lost most of my like early life. But I realized that like, it's important to sort of, you have to graduate high school, and that's a good thing. But I had no interest in going to college, and sort of I dove into tech very early. I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and then we moved because my mom had a health problem, and so we moved to Northern California. And I ended up in San Francisco in like 98, 99, right? Which is sort of when sort of the tech boom was happening, right before the bust. Got into that, I learned a lot of lessons. Of like, how do you build a real business, how to build a fake business, because I saw all of the .com booms and bombs, right, of how that all happened. I just went through that, but at my heart, I've always been an entrepreneur, which is I think is the best skill for everybody to learn. Whatever you do, whatever you're passionate about in life, even if you have sort of a day job, right, which that pays the bills, is that you should always have something on the side, which is what you're passionate about, and understand how to increase sort of, that you should always have a side gig. I'll just stop it there, right? It's like, you should always be thinking about yourself and do what you actually care about. It's great to have a 9-to-5 job, but you should really be focusing on how do you build a business on your own that you have ownership in, to sort of give yourself that financial freedom going forward. And that's been my sort of ethos, like from, I'll say 17 or 18 years old. Long story short, I'm rambling a bit, Ron. You can stop me whenever you want.
No.
Okay. I'll say, I spent time, I was an IT guy. That's my training. It's just like it was easy for me to solve problems. That's really the way that my brain is wired. So I became an IT guy in San Francisco. And eventually I sort of built up the goodwill and the relationships when I had the idea that I thought was going to be my future, that I could go back and talk to, my VC friends on how to sort of fund that. And actually, like the genesis of lottery.com actually came from my partner, my co-founder, Matt Clemenson. And the idea was like, look, we should create an app that allows people to just check their numbers online, right? So like, if you buy a lottery ticket, you can take a picture of it. We check the numbers for you. We let you know if you've won. We did that, and then we realized like, well, wait, what if we can actually let people play the lottery from their phone, in a legal and compliant way? And this is sort of, lottery is an industry that is so legacy, I'll say, in the nicest way possible, which is just, you walk in with a piece of paper, which is your dollar, and you walk out with a piece of paper, which is your ticket. And that was a hard sell about, 6 years ago, right? Which was 2015 when we started the company. Very difficult to get done. But as we've gone forward, is like, we have shown that lottery is a social good. It is a way for people to contribute to the local economy, usually on the education side. But at the same time is that people don't want to go well, I'll say the younger generations don't want to go with their paper money and redeem a paper ticket. Is that is, it's not they don't want to play, it's that they don't want to go to the store and they don't carry cash. So that's like a bit big, that has been a huge driver for us. And then once COVID hit, is as difficult as that has all been for everybody, is that has the only silver lining from our perspective is that the lotteries have realized that you must modernize. You don't have a choice anymore. Like, you know, like the future is being online, which is true of everything, which is true of Amazon shopping and everything else that we do in the world, and that you have to sort of modernize. And so we've sort of, from a capitalist perspective, we've been very fortunate in that perspective. I'll stop there, Ron. I'll let you go.
No, that's a great story. And it's, you know, the tagline right underneath us is, from space, it's obvious that everything is changing, right? And so the silver lining of 2020 is that it's a forcing function for change. And hopefully it's change for the better. So we don't want to go back to the upside down status quo. We want to go back to something better, something where, you know, those legacy systems like you talk about, you know, a lot of them don't really have any good reasons for being the way they are. It's just, this is the way we've always done it. Back when we had horses pulling carts, you know,
Right.
and it's time to modernize. So yeah. I see a lot of people tuning in, but nobody has any questions. I can't believe it. So talk about Win Together.
Sure.
And how that evolves out of lottery.com. Well, first of all, just before we move on from lottery.com, what is your vision for it? Where do you see it going? You know, what gets you to work every day?
Sure. You know, I think as lottery.com as a company is, you know, our goal is to sort of be a global marketplace for games of chance. And so I would say, like, the easiest way to, you know, define that is like the Amazon of lottery, which means that, you know, as we onboard all of it, and it's true all over the world, which is that once, you know, COVID hit, is that all of these sort of the state or country revenues went to mostly zero in the retail world. And so our goal is to sort of onboard all of those sovereign country or state lottery games, bring them onto our platform and just digitize them. It's honestly like one of the simplest things that can happen and must happen over time. And so that's really our future going forward. And then on Win Together is that I'll say that the lottery is a social good game. And so if whatever state that you're in, if you buy a lottery ticket, Powerball, Mega Millions, what have you, is that about a third of those funds goes towards your local government, usually towards education. And I'll say that the best example I can give you of what the efficacy of that is in the HOPE program, which is out of Georgia. So in Georgia, if you get I think a B+ average all the way through high school, is that the Georgia lottery pays for your entire college tuition, which is phenomenal, right? Like, that's the way to do things. And so, like, our goal is to, one, bring some transparency of where these dollars go. You know, like, if you are buying a $2 ticket, like, you know, and a third of that goes towards the state, where do those dollars go, and what's the efficacy? Like, are we really being a social good enterprise? And then with Win Together is what we realize, that we can be a bit more specific, meaning we can create a charitable sweepstakes where if you donate to a specific cause, we just want to incentivize you, honestly, which means people have two sides to their brain. I think at a very high level. Obviously, there's multiple sides to the brain, but if you can just sort of buy into that, there's sort of the philanthropic side, and there's also a selfish side. And there's nothing wrong with being a little bit selfish. And so all we want to do is sort of, if you care about a cause, we want to incentivize you to pull the trigger and take that action to actually donate to that cause. And so with wintogether.org, you can donate to a specific cause that you actually care about, and have a chance to win something amazing, whether that's a luxury car, like with the Arbor Day Foundation, we're giving away a Cybertruck, you know, or it's a celebrity experience, or it's a cash prize, whatever that is we want to be able to deliver that to you. We're just trying to appeal to both sides of people's minds, I guess. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember back when we met in New York, there was a conversation going around about how we could create a lottery that would end world hunger.
Yeah.
Whatever happened with that?
That's no, it's still in progress. That is obviously, like, world hunger is a really big hill to climb, right? But we've talked to UNICEF, which is one of our partners, and you can imagine sort of coming in from as a gaming company, how they perceive us, right? It's sort of like, shields up for sure, with, like, when you first start talking to them. But as we talked to them, they started to understand, like, that what we can do, just like leveraging the gaming mechanics of what we're doing, to raise a tremendous amount of money. But I remember being in Rome, actually, which is one of the headquarters of the UN and UNICEF, and they said, like, look, I don't think you understand what you're really doing. If you can raise $3 billion in a 1 year's time, you can effectively feed all the hungry people in the world. Like, there will be no more hungry people, if that makes sense. It doesn't solve all of world hunger, right? Like, there's levels of hunger, obviously, like, when you dig into it, but we can keep people alive, right? Like, the people who are literally starving to death for $3 billion, that could be done. And so that was like a big awakening for me of, like, that's the goal, right? Because how many Einsteins or geniuses are there that are born all around the world that literally die in childhood because we can't give them enough calories, right? And so if we just sort of, like, look at that focus, and it's a long time horizon, right? Like, who knows what those kids are going to do in their lifetime, but there are brilliant, genius people born around the world all the time. And I feel like it's my goal and mission to make sure that they, make it to adulthood and just have an opportunity, because there's so many brilliant people that just never get the chance. They don't have the opportunity to show what they have. And like, I know I feel that. So, like, I want to be able to give that.
Yeah, that's a good example how there is no us and them. There's only we.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, if we're helping a community on the other side of the world, we're helping ourselves too. It's not just one-sided. So let me pop up a comment from Wanda. This is a refreshing conversation, a welcome respite from the daily angst that is presented to us. So I want to talk about the daily angst, because
sure.
I guess what Wanda is talking about is the swirling divisiveness that's all around us right now. Everybody in their own, echo chamber filled walls, and just amplifying divisive opinions, and our seemingly inability to have rational conversations across different perspectives, right? And I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I think this is a really good path to go down in our conversation. And I think one of the big problems right now is that we have an erosion of trust. All of the typical or traditional places where trust can be found, whether that's scientists, whether that's journalism, good effective journalism, whether that's the government or elected officials, all of that has been eroded, right? Whether it's the heads of corporations, what not normally, but historically has been seen as, fountains of trust, and our civilization is built on that trust, has been, significantly eroded. To the point where if we're presented, we all form our own opinions, and if we're presented with evidence counter to our opinion, instead of changing our opinion or evolving our opinion, we ignore the facts, or we write them off as being false or whatever, no matter where the source is coming from, even if it's a world expert on something, it doesn't matter. And so, technology is never the only solution, but there are some technological advancements that have occurred in the recent past that are developing right now exponentially, that could potentially form some levels of inherent trust right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
like for instance, one of the big things that Uber had to deal with when what was coming is that people trusted the taxi certification, right? That this was
Yeah.
this was an organization that was run by trustworthy people that certify that this taxi is good to get into, right? But technology was able, through peer review and all of this kind of stuff, was able to create inherent trust, making those certifications obsolete. And so with the advent of blockchain, we have this capability to have immutable, completely transparent trust develop.
Yeah.
And so, I've been a lot of people have commented during the show, and I certainly have experienced this myself, is nobody in the world has enough free time to do all the due diligence and all the fact checking required to check everybody's opinion or every newscast or every report. It's impossible to do that. So what that means is you have to be really careful with what you take in. So I haven't come up with yet, a blockchain based or technology based way to have just information out into the world. But there are ways that we can use systems like blockchain to offer some transparency, whether it's transparency that our donations are actually going to the things that we say they are, transparency that if some company says that they don't, that they're free trade and they don't have any child, labor and all this kind of stuff, that there's a blockchain-based supply chain that validates that, and there's no way around that. So what are your thoughts on the emerging technology like blockchain to help build inherent trust?
That's a very good question. I think if we look to sort of like the trust factor, right, is honestly, if you are a person who only gets your news sources, right, like very specific on the politics side, if you only have like one source of news, I can promise you have gravitated towards a source that will reinforce your beliefs. And it's so important to get that different perspective, right? Even if you hate everything that you see, you should find the equivalent on the other side of the aisle that gives you a completely different view. And honestly, usually it's the truth is somewhere in between, right? Is like this side, they have their own agenda and this side has their own agenda. And if you sort of like mix those together, you'll at least have a better view of what's actually happening in the world. That's very important. From the blockchain perspective, let's just think about voting on the blockchain, like for, the president. 4 years ago, we had half the country didn't believe in the election results. And now 4 years later, we have the other side not believing in the election results. And so there's a trust issue just in the process that we actually have to decide who runs our country. And that's a big hill to climb for sure. And it's disingenuous for people to say honestly, it's just both sides, right? Like if you didn't believe it in 2016, why do you believe in 2020? And it's more about to the heart of what you're talking about is we pick sides, right? Is that is sort of where it's tribalism, and we are hardwired from a perspective to choose a tribe and to be a member of that tribe. And that I think is the thing that we have to evolve from, because as I've told you, Ron, I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And so I'm a hardcore Broncos fan, and I don't like the Chiefs and I don't like the Raiders, but also I realize now at this age is, if I grew up in Kansas City, I would definitely be a Chiefs fan, right? Why do I love this team? Why have I chosen this team? It's because I was born and raised there, and that is my heritage, and I should.
It's part of your identity.
Exactly.
You have taken that on as part of your identity.
100%.
And identity is normally something to be defended at all costs.
Exactly.
Even against facts.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the thing is I inherited this identity, right? And it's fine because it's sports, right? But also I grew up watching John Elway do all these fourth quarter comebacks and all of these amazing things, and he instilled a lot of the underdog mentality in myself. But he hasn't played in 20 plus years, and I have no idea who is playing now. What's the current roster? Literally, I root for the blue and orange laundry, and I don't like the red and white laundry. And those are the folks that actually play every Sunday, right?
Right.
It's completely irrational, but it's fine because it's sports, and I love sports, right? And we should have that. But if you zoom out a little bit on the dolly zoom, right, that's what politics has become in the last 20 years, which is just like, all right, everybody, you must pick a team. It's either red or blue, and that's it.
Right.
And that's so absurd, right? But we all do it. And, you know, like taking back to sports, if I love the Broncos and one of the players has some type of scandal, right, I will forgive that scandal and say, well, it's not that serious. It's not this. It's not that.
Yeah.
But if the other side has the same exact scandal, well, they're the bad guys, right? They are the worst people in the world. And that's really the problem, is that I've watched the podcast and it's just picking a team is the worst thing you can possibly do, in my opinion, right? And that's a problem in almost everything, right? But like specifically in politics, is that once we pick a team, we decide we're in with them, and we will excuse any bad behavior that anybody has, and anybody on the other side of the aisle, will make sure that we vilify them and we hate them.
Yeah.
And that we will never get to a point of unity if we continue down that path. It's so destructive.
It's destructive, and it weakens us, because what it does is one side says, I refuse to see any merit whatsoever in the position of the other side, because if we recognize any merit, then they will gain and we will lose. It's it's this zero-sum game thing that we're doing. So I think you hit the nail on the head. And let me pop up this comment from Joshua. Alternate facts are evidence of an anti-intellectual rise in the U.S. So let's talk about that for a second, because you brought up a thing about how we have to evolve away from tribalism, basically.
Sure. But
we may not have to evolve away from tribalism. Maybe what we need to do is continually broaden our tribe, our definition of tribe, right? Because if we're a tribe of earthlings, until we have an alien invasion, or until we're no longer, considered the only intelligent life in the universe that we know of, we'll be fine. And so, I've been thinking about this anti-intellectualism, right? Or I would say anti-elitism is probably the way to put it. And I don't think it just appeared. I think we've always had that, but it's really been amplified lately, because a lot of the differences have been amplified. Like the gap between the rich and the poor has amplified. The gap between those with power and those without power has amplified and expanded. And so, there's been, to me, it all boils down to belonging. Do you feel like you belong? Are you benefiting from the system that exists right now, or are you outside the system, and are you just a pawn in this game that you have no control over, right? And I think that mentality, or that philosophy, or that belief, started things like Occupy Wall Street and all of these things. And so there is a large percentage of the population that thinks that the system is rigged against them, and that they're angry about that, obviously, and they look for tribes, if you will, to latch onto, to try and belong to something to make up for that lack that they feel the system's rigged against them. And the reason why they feel the system is rigged against them is because it is. We have a system that is unfair. We have an unjust, inequitable system that
we do.
Where the people in power get more power, the people with money get more money, the people with the best educations get more education. It just keeps feeding on itself. So, what are your thoughts on that? In light of Joshua's point.
Oh wow, that's a big point. I agree. I'll say the expansion of what your tribe means is maybe the most important thing. Is in the U.S. right now, is we have people who just hate their own people, and I remember I'm 41 right now, but I remember even early 20s, right, where I could have a conversation with somebody who had a different political viewpoint with me, and we could still be friends.
Yep.
Right, like we could argue all day long, and then we drop it, right? I don't think that's true anymore. Is like now it's like, people see however they see if it's opposite of what they believe, that those are actually bad humans and they want the worst for the world. That's not true. Like, I actually believe that we all want the same things. What is the greatest good for the most amount of people that we can possibly come up with? We have different ideas on how to get there, maybe, but like we still want the greater good to happen. That's effectively gone, and what happens is it's shut down conversation, where now people don't talk anymore. Like if Ron, if you and I met and we had drastically political views, we would suss that out very quickly, and we would just not talk about it. And so there's no across the aisle discussion of what is happening or what's going to happen, and that further pushes us apart, right? Like, we get more and more away from each other, and we just start to, again, like whatever the news sources that we have decided to trust, it more reinforces that belief, and we get farther apart. Like, and I don't think that can continue. It can't continue.
Yeah.
Eventually we get to either a collapse or a breakthrough.
So I think part of the problem is that we have such a short attention span. And we've been conditioned to basically be lazy, for lack of a better word, in that for instance, when you meet somebody who has a differing opinion than you, the easy way out is just to dismiss them and think that they're stupid or ignorant or uneducated or whatever.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, okay, why do they think that way? What's leading to think that way? If somebody sees something in their post that in their newsfeed that really they like, and they really agree with it, but it's kind of questionable whether it might be true, instead of checking it, they just post it, right? And, I said that we have this fatigue about, you can't possibly, check everything, do a quality control on every piece of information that's out there. But you should do that for every piece of information that you share. Because when you post something, you are putting the responsibility on yourself to say, okay, I know for a fact, because to the best of my ability, I have verified that the facts in quotation marks that I'm putting out into the world have been verified. But almost nobody does that. Almost everybody just blindly reposts or puts out things, and then we get into this escalating exponential, increase in the amount of craziness that gets put in the world, and truth gets lost in it. We can't discern truth from that. So yeah, I think I think that's a big issue.
No, I agree. I think the real thing that needs to happen, I hope that will happen in the next however many years, is that we stop choosing teams. And that was my point of like talking about sports, right? Is if I had grown up in Kansas City, I would have loved the Chiefs, right? And I would have hated the Broncos. But that's all just where we come from. And we have to get to a point where we stop rooting for teams. Like right now in politics, people either, root for the red team or the blue team, but we're not actually on that team. We're fans of that team, right? Like, just like the common people are just fans of whatever that team is. And instead of buying a ticket to go to see the game, we either donate or vote for that team. But they're going to do what they do, but that like, we shouldn't define ourselves as fans of a specific team. Like my hope is that somebody comes along at some point that can disrupt that entire ecosystem and say, look, I'm not a part of a team. I am who I am. Here are the things that I believe. Stop rooting for a specific team and just understand me as a person. And this is what I want to do. Here's my track record. And like, let's go forward. In my opinion, I think it's incredibly important that at some time in the next 10 or 20 years is that we disrupt the two-party system in the US.
Oh yeah.
Because it just cannot continue. It's just so divisive by design. Like if it's binary, it is divisive, right?
So I think that it's okay to be a part of a team. I don't think as long as you're part of a team in the context of the game that's being played, right? And so if you're a fan of the Broncos, then you prefer that they win and you root for them to win and you're happy when they win. But that doesn't mean that you're going to dismiss them cheating or, you're playing and you realize that it's a game, right? That it's just a game, that you're not going to go turn over buses if they lose because or loot and light things on fire because it's just a game, right? And
Sure.
when you talk about political parties, I think it's okay to identify with it. No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong word. That is the word. That's the word that gets us in trouble, when you identify with a political party. So I think it's okay to lean towards a specific political party, as long as you understand it's in the context of the game that's being played. And the game that's being played is that these are elected officials who are elected for the benefit of the country, to move the country forward in progress and to serve the citizens of that nation, right? It's not to serve the needs of the donors, the special interest groups, and the party itself, right? And so what that means is, if you lean towards a particular political party, you're mostly focused on the issues that political party is dealing with. And if that party is, not going down a path that you want them to go in a particular issue, then there's no problem with, if the policies of the other party are more aligned with you, that's okay too. This is all about bringing together the best of everything that we have, not the best of half of what we have. And so I think that's a really important distinction in this.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I think I just hope that people evaluate their own team the same way that they evaluate the other side's team. Right, is like, if you don't have a good quarterback, get rid of that quarterback, right? And get them gone as soon as possible, and not make excuses for them on anything that they do, right? And like, if we can at least start to have like an honest conversation about who our team is, I'm fine with that. I do still believe that in the future is that, I hope, politically speaking, that we don't have teams anymore. Is that like somebody comes along? But I'll say this: if you look at sort of the history of like the U.S. presidency, right? Is we had George W. Bush, and then we had Clinton, and then we had another Bush, and we were about to have another Clinton, right? It's just two families, honestly, that were going to sort of be the presidency for most of our adult lifetimes. And then you had a disruptor come in, which was Obama. He came in, and he was so different than anything that anybody had ever seen that he won the presidency. That is, I think, the type of disruption that we need. Because if he had not come along, we would have had, Bush, Clinton, and that's what our presidency history would have been. Two families, that's it. And you can't tell me that there's only two families in the entire country that could produce really good candidates, but that's what it was. And so I guess my point is, I think we need a second wave of disruption, which is that some candidate comes along, which sort of, just sort of excels or is so much above the current conversation that we're having that people are gravitated to that person, man or woman, it doesn't matter. But there's somebody who realizes that, like, the team, to your point, should be, we are Americans and we have the same goals, which is the best possible lives for all of the people in our country. We may have different ideas of how we get there, but that's our goal. Yeah. And if that's an actual uniter, in my opinion, which is that, it's like, I don't care what aisle you sit in, is like, our goal is the same and we need to get there. How do we get there?
Yeah. And I truly believe that the vast majority of the people in the country, the vast majority of the politicians in the country, the vast majority of the people in the world want that. They want peace, they want security, they want everyone to have happy. They don't want to have poor. They want everybody to be lifted up. I mean, I think the vast majority of people want to make the world a better place, right?
Absolutely.
So let's just keep on this topic of teams, because I think we're onto something here. And when I misspoke before and I said it's okay to identify with a team, that actually is a thing that's not okay. The thing that's not okay is to derive your identity from a team, whether that's a sports team, whether that's a political party, because what that leads to is, when you are presented an alternating view or an alternative view, an alternative perspective from the other team or the other party, you take that as an affront on yourself, on your personal self-identity. And you're going to fight it with tooth and nail. And so, so as an example, so say two people are together and they're on opposite sides of the political spectrum, and both of them have identified with their party. It's part of their self-identity. And one person says something that the other one disagrees with, they're going to be into this two-dimensional, very shallow exchange, right? If only one of them doesn't see it that way, if one of them sees this is not part of my identity, I just want what's best, and looks at what they're saying and honestly tries to figure out if what they're saying is true, if there's any value, if there's anything to be gained from that perspective, and if the answer still becomes no, this is not something that's going to move us forward. This is not something that's going to help us to progress. Then they don't just immediately write that person off as stupid, ignorant, uneducated. They say, why is that person feeling this way? Is it out of pain? Is it out of suffering? Are they going through some crisis right now where this is a glimmer of hope for them that they're latching onto? Basically having empathy and active listening. And so, if you have two people that are both doing that, then all this problem goes away. But I think it only takes one to start that process, and it becomes a chain reaction. And so if you are in a heated debate on social media or at the kitchen table or whatever it is, realize that both of you have identified with your positions. And if only one of you disidentifies with that position, things will be a lot better.
No, you're completely right. And I think it might be as simple as saying, like, I understand where you're coming from, right? Like if somebody's like very, explicit on their views, if you just say
or I don't understand where you're coming from, help me understand,
Yeah, no, you're right. But it's like I believe in the axiom of like what you resist persists, right? Like whatever you're pushing against, like the harder you push, the harder they'll push back, right? Whatever that is. Right. But if you can just say like, okay, it's okay that we have a different view on the world. I assume that we all want the best thing. Very few people like want the worst thing in the world, right? Like most people want the most amount of people to have good lives. So let's talk about how we can get there. We might have very different ideas on how we get there, but like let's have that conversation. But I've had a lot of conversations with people that I disagree with very strongly. But whenever you say like you're wrong, that's a stupid thing to say. Immediately, everybody's walls go up, and now there's no more conversation, right? Like the best thing is like, okay, explain to me, right? Like, how did you get there? What do you mean? Why do you want this thing? How would that work out in the future, right? Exactly what you're saying is that like that's how we get unity, is to stop assuming that we're always on different teams. Like we are on the same team.
I don't agree with that at all. That's completely stupid. I don't believe that.
Okay, I like that.
No, I'm trying to.
I want to hear you. Go ahead. Give it to me, Ron. That's fantastic. Tell me why I'm stupid.
No, but you see, I mean, just as a ridiculous example, that's how we talk to each other. And part of the reason why we have these polarized views is because we're all in these boxes with echo chamber walls. Yeah. We're all being fed, amplified information on exactly what the algorithms think we want to hear. So
I completely agree. It's just, I guess you have to assume like, look, if you think you're smart, you can't assume that everybody is stupid, right? And that like their entire life experience has just led them to, such idiocy. You have to assume when you engage with somebody that they are as smart as you, and they just have different beliefs than you. It's not a stupid belief. It's just a different belief. And if you sort of go towards a perspective of like, let's talk this out, let's go forward, and either you will convince them or they will convince you.
Right.
And it's okay either way. You should also be okay with like, maybe I'm wrong, right? Like maybe maybe everything that I've known in my entire life is completely wrong, and I actually want to be convinced of something else. But if you are so beholden to your beliefs and you are rigid in that and you will never change that belief, you can't have a real conversation about anything, like, because you're never going to learn anything.
Right. Yeah. Somebody who already knows everything can't possibly learn anything. So, and I mean, this goes back to what Joshua was saying about anti-intellectualism, right? I mean, that's what you're saying is basically, there is a lot of intellectual or elitism in our country and in the world right now. And so there is a lot of dismissal of alternative perspectives, right? They're baskets of deplorables, right? I mean, I mean, there's lots of, we're up here in our ivory tower and they're all, let them eat cake, type of thing. So let's shift gears a little bit and Let's talk. This is Mr. Switzerland 88. For the people that are going through difficult times, whether it be financially, academically, relationships, how do you think the orbital perspective can help people through those difficult times? Since you don't have to be in orbit to have an orbital perspective, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. I think with personal relationships, same thing I said before is like we all grow up and we have when I think about myself, I think about like I'm like a horse in Central Park with the blinders on, right? Like pulling a little cab. I can only see through my own eyes, and that's the perspective I have. And the goal, or what you should strive for, is like seeing other people's perspective, which is take yourself out of your existing perspective, your own wants, your own needs, what you want to actually accomplish. That's stage one, I think. Stage two is like, okay, the other person on the other side of the table, like, what do they want? Like where do they come from? What's motivating them? And, like, I think we're a product of our experiences, our trauma, and, all of those things combined. And I'll say perspective is a real-time thing, which means that like I'll have a different perspective now than I do in 2 years, probably, right? It'll be slightly different, but your perspective is where you are at the moment, viewing things through your own eyes. So if you can, first understand that everybody has a different perspective. We all have different things that drive us, right? We have our different histories, different, experiences. And then two, do your best to understand those other perspectives and what drives those people. Then you can at least have a real conversation, right? And it's not easy, honestly. Like it takes time to develop that skill, but it's a muscle that you can build up for sure, to understand like why people do things. And that's expandable to everything, whether it's a business discussion, if you're doing, some type of negotiation, or it's a personal relationship and you want to have either a different or better relationship with that person. Everything honestly comes down to perspective. That's why I love the podcast. Honestly, Ron, is like, yes, perspective is so important to me, because like I believe that the success that I've had has come down to seeing other people's perspective. Because if you can understand someone else, then you can have much better communication with them, and that's where you have to strive for, at least.
Yeah, I mean, what is undeniably, obviously obvious from the orbital perspective is that the saying "we're all in this together" is not a cliche, right? I mean, It's been made undeniable, but through things like COVID-19 and other crises, that we are literally, each and every one of us, riding through the universe together on this spaceship that we call Earth.
Yeah.
And what's also, if you take that a little deeper, if you dolly zoom a little deeper, there is no us and them. There's only we, right? And so, Mr. Switzerland 88, maybe to dive in a little bit more into your question about people, when financial trouble and relationship trouble, academic, all of these things, is to realize that we're all in this together. And so all of us, as the other thing that, we're riding through the universe together on the spaceship that we call Earth, but there's no passengers on this spaceship. We're all crewmates. And as crewmates, we have an obligation and a responsibility to mind the ship and to take care of our fellow crewmates. And so all of us, no matter what your situation, needs to be on the lookout for folks who are struggling or having problems. And if you are the person that is struggling and having a problem, you need to basically be able to ask for help. And so, we talk a lot about expeditionary behavior, and, we get locked in a can for 6 months on the space station, and, it's in a hostile environment, and you have to learn how to work together as a team, and you have to work together in this isolation and overcome all these challenges. And one of the first things that you're taught is that you don't do anybody good if you yourself is too overly fatigued or sick or injured. And so you have to do things for self-care. And then once your basic needs are met, and you have the bandwidth to look out at others. The first episode of this podcast, back when we were still calling it Sheltered in Place, Conversation Sheltered in Place, was live from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York back early in the year, when that was like the ground zero of the spike. And we talked to doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, but we also talked to folks who were experts in recharging batteries, and so they were setting up recharge rooms around the hospital for the frontline workers, for the healthcare professionals to unplug, recharge, get they had VR, they had aromatherapies, they had this soothing music, they had backgrounds like your background right now, where basically they could simulate being back in nature and recharging. And so it's really, really important to realize that you need to take care of yourself, and the only way we're going to get through this is together, and we need to watch out for each other, and to be in a position, if you are taking care of yourself, to be able to help others is really, really important. Cool. Lots of comments come in. I'm going through as many as I can. We were talking about gaming. So here's a famous gamer, famous poker player.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jamie, for your comment. This is a wise and thoughtful discussion necessary for healing the world. Thank you both for taking the time to do this, and thank you, Jamie Gold, for all that you're doing to help bring unity to the world. And so for people that don't know, Jamie is the winner of the Poker World Series, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, he's actually the largest winner of the World Series of Poker of all time.
Okay,
he won the biggest amount.
Tony, do you speak Spanish, perhaps?
Oh, very, very little.
There's comments coming in Spanish, and unfortunately, neither one of us are.
I'll do my best if we can try to decode it, but that's all I can promise.
Yeah. So we're coming to the close. We just got a couple minutes left. Anything that you want to say about entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship can help out in crises?
Well, entrepreneurship is such a core part of me. Like I barely graduated high school, and I've just been an entrepreneur my entire life. It's like I sort of believe that I feel like I'm a sort of a slugger at heart, in the baseball sense of like I try to swing the bat as hard as I can whenever I possibly can, and I've done that since I was a kid. Which means like I'm not interested in a base hit. I don't want to just get on base. Like I just swing as hard as I possibly can, and that's sort of what entrepreneurship is just swinging for the fences whenever you possibly can. And I believe that that's sort of the way forward. Like I think there are so many entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs who don't ever take the plunge because they believe that the sort of 9-to-5 W-2 life is safety. And we're going to get way off topic here, but I'm just going to ramble for a minute, Ron, if that's okay. I don't think that's actually safety. Sort of like just having a regular job with no upside and sort of buying into the system of, I'm going to work 40 or 50 hours a week for 50 weeks a year for 50 or 60 years of my life. And then at the end of that, I'm going to be, 60 or 70 something, and I'm going to then retire. I don't feel like that's safety. And I've had so many friends who, even in the last year, who thought that they were safe, right? And they were employees, and then their job is gone now, and then now they're in a very rough spot. But also, like I just realized early on that I just want to swing the bat, and I would rather do that for the next 40 or 50 years and eventually hit a home run, because you got to assume that you're going to get better a little bit, right? You're going to learn a few things. Right. Eventually, I'll hit a home run, then sort of put a nest egg together and go forward with all of that. Because the honest, like this, the stats are about half of U.S. adults don't have retirement. They don't have enough money when they retire, right? Like they literally have $0 when they die. And so success in that model is, I'm going to work for 40 or 50 years. I'm going to get 2 weeks off a year. And when I actually am old enough to actually retire, my goal changes, which is hopefully I've banked up a bunch of money. And my goal from that point forward is I hope that I die before I run out of money. And that's the truth, right? Like I cross my fingers and I hope that I die before I run out of money, because if I don't, now I am an obligation to somebody else, right? I'm an obligation to my family to take care of me. And so I really, really hope that I hope that I die before I run out of money. And like, I just never wanted that. And I think this is another totally separate discussion, but I really think that the employee mindset is just not the way forward. Like that, we cannot do what we're doing now for the next 50 or 100 years. Like there has to be disruption in that, where everybody is incentivized and we can all win together, and we can all, build our wealth as employees as we sort of grow forward. I'm rambling a bit.
No, that's a great point, and it's such a great point that I recommend that we dive deeper in that in our recorded session. So if you don't know, we're obviously doing this live right now, but we're going to when this ends, we're going to continue this conversation and just have it recorded only, and then we'll make that available to folks to watch. But I think this idea of the traditional 9 to 5 for 40 years to get yourself to retirement. I think that's a good thread to pull on for
absolutely
that follow-on conversation. But Tony, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the live part of this. Thank you for being on the last Orbital Perspective episode for 2020. We've got.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. It's our honor. And for everybody watching this, send us your comments. We're gonna revamp and retool for 2021, and we really want to hear what you want. Let us know what you want. Give us some suggestions on how we can do better, what we can do. Give us suggestions for what type of people you want to hear from, what topics, what subjects. 2021 is the year where we're going to get out of these crises, and we're going to go back to some level of normality, but it's not going to be, hopefully, going back to the way things were. It's going to be going to something that's better, that's more evolved, that's more that leads to more progress and to a more positive future for all of us. And so, Tony, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
All the good that you're creating through lottery.com and through wintogether.org. And really for your contribution to the world, and thank you for your insight, sharing your insights so generously today with everybody.
Thanks for having me, Ron. I really appreciate it. I love the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And with that, see you guys next year.
All right.
Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
everybody.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us during this conversation from the Orbital Perspective, and thank you for being a part of an emerging unity on our planet. We are strongest when we are aligned around the truth of our underlying unity. Together, we are unstoppable and can build a positive, restorative future, a future that we would all want to be a part of. Please subscribe to the Orbital Perspective podcast and follow us on social media. Thank you for all that you're doing and all that you will do to help make life on our planet as beautiful as it looks from space.